Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our limited edition live broadcast. Yeah, titled Women Unlimited, Advancing Beyond Barriers and Bias. And I've got in the hot seat tonight a godly woman. Yes, her name is Yemi Adu Majekodumi. Good to have you here.
Thank
Wow.
you. It's an honor to be here, a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Good to have you here. So, Yemi is a female empowerment coach, and actually, she also loves empowering, supporting, helping, and enabling widows. She's the author of Walking Out of Widowhood, and that is just what she's just in that space to help widows recover from where they've been to where they can be. So, could you just tell us a bit about yourself, Yemi, and what led you to what you're doing to today?
Okay. Hello, everybody. As repeated, my name is Yemi Majekodumi. I'm a surviving widow of over 8 years, and my background is in mental health expertise for over 25 years. So I've always worked in the space where I build people up from brokenness to being well and returning to what individuals want to do or groups, male or female. However, a turning point came in my life when I lost my husband over 8 years ago. And I just had to fight. I couldn't sink. And my words of affirmation to myself was, I will not be defeated by this. So, in fighting and gaining ground, I always believed and continue to believe that there's always hope after loss. And whatever circumstance we find ourselves in is how we perceive and react to those circumstances. So I started off initially by writing a blog, and the blog basically survivingwidow.com, and it was basically looking at the basic walking, the first year of what to do if you lose your husband. Because I've always believed that when we have a challenge in our lives, the way we recover quicker also is to divert the attention away from yourself and help other people in it. And before you look back at yourself, you find you're actually getting stronger from giving to someone else. So I've always been gifted with that, and I've always been opportune to be in a similar kind of space. So I did the blog, shared my life story, not so much on the actual incident, but more on the positive side of what solutions have I found to walk out of widowhood. And the walking, I always have to explain this online because people think I literally mean walking, but walking is a spiritual word, meaning from within, a spiritual walk, which meant through my faith, I felt I was awakened inside of me to start trying to find my way out of loss. So that was a spiritual walk. And then gradually, as I started to rise from my spirit, I started to see these actions in my physical. Okay, so that's in brief. And then gradually, as I got stronger, I became more impassioned to carry this mission of empowering widows. Why? Because I came to realize that when my husband died, people were not consciously aware of it, but I was aware, and a lot of widows have shared the same that when even people came to visit you, there was something in the perception of the person visiting you of pity or perhaps your life ending. But because I was always a woman of faith, and I always speak from a Judeo Christian perspective because I believe in God, I believe in a creator. I always felt like no matter what circumstances I find myself in, I can empower my mind to see beyond what was presently happening to me. So when people came to see me, in spite of their personal perceptions, people were quite unconsciously surprised that I wasn't what they expected. It wasn't me, it was the power of God in me. So from that, I just felt deep down that because I can see the vision of not being defeated and beyond my circumstances, I felt it was only natural to give that gift to the world of widows. However, my journey stepped up a gear, especially during the lockdown, because I had more time on my hands. I was on furlough. So even though I'd written my book a year after my loss, and I'll just go back a bit. When it was a year and we did the memorial, I remember clearly looking around and thinking to myself, I'm still here. Oh my goodness. I haven't sunk yet. So I said, well, I must be doing something right. So I started writing my book. When I wrote my book, I wrote about different things, but a mentor taught me to separate the actual pain from into solutions, which I did. And that's what my book is about. And then lockdown, going back to lockdown, the momentum grew because I had more time. And then I started continue to do my podcast. And the podcast is about recovery to transformation, while my blog is about grief to recovery. Whilst so transformation now
I want to
means,
pause you there. So your
okay,
blog is about grief to recovery,
yes. So that
and
is
your
the, yeah, yeah. So
and
that is the
explain that
practical.
again.
Yeah, it gives you practical steps of how I walked my journey. So I cover different things. And in terms of what I did the first month, in terms of work, how to engage your world, how to self-care, so on and so forth. It covers that. You find that on businessandmarriagecoaching.co.uk. There's a link there on my blog. So
Okay.
that relates to those who have recently lost a spouse, especially with the COVID-19, or especially young people, so on and so forth. There's tools there to equip you and encourage you. The podcast it takes a different gear. Initially, it covers recovery, but it takes you down up the journey of finding greater purpose out of loss. So now you're grieving, you're recovering, and then you get to a point of grace, depending on how you're walking your grief. I don't give a timeline, but in my book I say for it to be quite relevant, perhaps you should have walked the journey 2 years.
Okay, so I'm going to pause you there again. So how
Okay.
can women find a greater purpose out of loss? What is one or two steps they can take to find greater purpose out of loss?
Okay. Number one, they need to lean. You need to lean into your loss. That means you grieve, but you don't avoid the grief. So to even begin to think of purpose, you need to feel the pain you're feeling. So what does that mean? That means accepting there's pain and find ways of how you are going to recover. So recovery means, number one, it doesn't mean isolation, because what tends to happen is there's a villain in every part of our society or in us that might try to convince you to hide away in shame because you've lost your spouse. And in a lot of the cultures we come from, a lot of women, it's such a big deal to be married. It's a lovely thing to be married, but there's nothing wrong if you're single either. And that relates to what we're saying now. And even in the word of God, there's some people that have a ministry to just be single. So not everybody wants to get married. And I say that in the context of what I talk about. So there's that. So you need to lean, you need to recognize a major thing has happened in your life. So how do I get help to recover or find my way gradually to get strength? But it's when you self-care, taking into account, perhaps some people might do counseling, some people might get a coach, a mentor, a therapist. Some people might form a support group or lead a support group in that area to divert the pain. But you have to find an outlet for your pain and still remember you're still recovering. You might have been married for 20 years. You've lost a major part of you. So, number two, it's in finding your strength and walking the path of recovery. What moves you up a gear to get stronger is to start to find something, perhaps something that you could do in memory of your late spouse. So it's from having that dream and zeal to do that. It makes you stronger. Like personally, I find I tend to write a podcast every week. And I cover all areas of, I mean, anyone can listen to the podcast really, but I call it Widow Recovery Secrets because that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
But you find that I'm still walking the journey. Even though you find purpose, it's still, the loss is still there. But every day you navigate your loss in different ways. So for example, you might have lost your spouse, but life still goes on. You might have another adversity, another distress, another thing might happen. So if you haven't cushioned yourself in the loss of what you're going through, how do you prevent not being knocked down twice from what comes
Mhm.
from life?
Okay. So you said one of the things widows can do is find something you can do in memory of your late spouse. What would that entail? What would that really entail if you wanted to find something you
It
can do?
doesn't. When you ask me that question, people tend to think it's a huge task. It can be something so simple. It can just be identifying in your community, perhaps one widow that initially can walk alongside of you. And then the next thing could be meeting three widows in your home just as a support group. So you edify each other and start to build from that. But you find anything you do in a small way or in a small space tends to snowball into something bigger. So the purpose is never a huge thing, but I believe in my faith, it just starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So purpose can be just you and another person just meets maybe once every fortnight and engage, but the dream starts to get bigger from the little. And that's why the word says, do not despise small beginnings.
Mm.
So that's what I would say. And many people I meet that even start doing things, they don't even give it a name yet. They don't even know it's a purpose out of loss. They don't even know really that it's a memorial to the loss or to their spouse. It's only when you start to talk about it and people start to interview, you start to realize, of course, it is a greater purpose out of loss, and it's giving me hope.
Okay, thank you for that. So another question I wanted to ask is what so a widow that wants is trying to, what if a widow is grieving for two? How long will the widow take to grieve? Is there any numbers? Would it be a long time, lengthy time? How would you know if someone is still grieving their spouse? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 2 years, two
Well,
months?
first, I would say initially, everybody, whatever loss you've had, we walk and grieve differently. However, you as an individual, you get to a point in your life where you have to decide intentionally to start finding your way out of loss. So some people I've met say perhaps it was 6 months, some people say it was a year. But I would say at least after a year, you need to start to have a plan for what you want your future to look like as a single person. So so that's initially the first thing, the intention. And I call it in my book the conscious intention to walk, to find my way through the loss. So number one, what do you want your life to look like in the future? Number two, the signs of knowing that you're still grieving could be number one, you're not still engaging in social events. You're spending a lot of time within some small circle. You get invited to events, you're not really socializing just yet. You're still talking a lot about your late spouse. Every conversation, 80% or 90% of it is still about your late spouse. You're still grieving. Number four, you can't take off your wedding band yet. Number five, you still dream about your late spouse all the time. Those are still signs that you're still grieving. And it's about you recognizing and not being too hard on yourself, but still in your physical, you still continue to get the support you need. Some people find it after, because studies show that even when you get counseling, you need at least perhaps a year to really engage properly in counseling or some kind of talking therapy. Because the first few months, especially, are you're still in shock, basically. Yeah, so those are the areas, or yes, so that's it. Those are the signs of that you're still grieving. Those five I tend to touch upon mostly.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you so much. So how could then they move beyond? How could a widow or widower as well move from those signs that they're still grieving to now trying to actually begin, as you say, to walk out of that widowhood?
Well, you can't, it's not necessarily a move, it's basically you have to engage your community. So, number one, you need to not isolate yourself. Number two, those that still stay around you, you need to be honest about how you're really feeling. Don't pretend that you're not in pain. Number three, I meet people who are still not sleeping well, they don't go out. They need to either get counseling or at least tell their GP or doctor of what's going on. Number four, when it becomes very low, there's some people that can drop to such low moods that starts to border mental health challenges. You might have to get some clinical support from your GP or be referred. But I always say your mind is the most powerful thing we could ever have from our creator. So, like, even in spite of what we're going through, what you teach your mind to believe in is what it will do. And that's where the power of positive confession comes in. So when I lost my husband, I said to myself and my children, I said, number one, I will not be defeated by this. Even though everything was still everything I saw didn't seem like that. But when you say that with your mouth daily, your mind engages that. Number two, I said to myself, I will not close my heart to love again. I still believe there's good to be married. And when it's the time and when I'm ready, it will happen. There was nothing in my physical that made me see that, but in my mind's eye and in my faith. And number three, fearless faith in action. So that means whatever we confess, we start to write a plan of how we're going to execute it. So in the first month, what do you plan to do? So let's assume you're off work. What are you planning to? So you've laid your husband to rest. While there's all the arrangements, you don't get to really think about your loss as well because you're preparing all the funeral, the cost, whatever. But after you've laid him to rest or her to rest, that's when reality kicks in. What are you going to do with your life? When all the visitors have left, who remains with you? And who can you identify as someone who's going to support you? That's when you have to have a plan. And I always say, what was my engineering force was I prayed to God. When I laid my husband to rest, I went to the Lord and said, he's died now. What am I supposed to do? And I prayed and I took time out to fast, to meditate on the word for 7 days. And that's when I started to have clarity. And it's always been part of me to read the word and meditate. When I say meditate, it means if you're grieving, you find scripture. If you're a Christian, you find a scripture in the word of God which talks about grieve. For example, the word says, we don't grieve like someone who has no hope. We believe in glory, meaning you still believe your husband, you will still meet again in glory after you pass. Hoping and praying your husband knew the Lord. So we don't hope, we don't grieve like those who have no hope. Hope is a very strong word. And my point of reference in scripture has always been Proverbs 13:12, which says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. A desire fulfilled is sweet to the soul. So as much as you are hurting, I'm still here. My husband has passed. I'm still walking through widowhood, but I'm finding continuously a greater hope. And in doing what you do, whatever you find to do to express this pain, you'll be amazed at how there's so many other people on that journey that will reignite your strength and reignite your faith in what you're doing in the physical.
That's amazing. That's so amazing. But from what you said, I have something I really want to ask you. What made you decide that you wouldn't close your heart to love?
Okay, that was the Lord. The Lord spoke to me. For those who are in faith, our Creator is real. Yeah, and the Bible says, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. I remember when I was in actually the first few months of my loss, I remember in my spirit that the Lord laid on me that as long as I do not close my heart to love, I will be able to do it again. And that's where it comes from. That's the answer, really.
So, women out there, are they really wanting to just be on your own while you were saying that as well? They really left the scene. You know
Yes,
what, women, you know what? That is such a great thing there that you don't have to close your heart to love again. Yeah, you're still living, and you say, and I love what you said about it's an internal walk. It's internal. No, it's not just a physical walk. Actually, it's an internal walk. You're
yes.
walking out of it is an internal walk. So what will what how can you what how can women who are widows who are still struggling to eternally come away from their spouse, how can you help them, and what do you do to help them? Because I know you're now doing stuff around that area.
Yeah, what I do
Really.
basically is I offer coaching. I use coaching as a vehicle to empower widows, and it takes the form of one-to-one coaching. On my website, businessandmarriagecoaching.co.uk, there's a package for 3 months. However, I can tailor make your coaching to meet your needs. So it would be like pass for 6 weeks, once a week, once one-to-one once a week. Then another thing I did, and I'm going to start doing in April, is teaching on different areas around things like emotional blockages. Why can't I heal from the past? Why do I still look at the past? What is holding me back from being able to visualize the future? How do I write a plan for the future? How do I really engage or get someone to help me? I'm stuck. What does being stuck really mean? Yeah. And those are things I'm looking to start teaching again from April. The last Thursday of each month, I'm going to start putting that on again on Thursdays in the evening. So watch this space. And obviously, I will advertise it on social media. And it's a way of also, because the more we are alike in certain issues we are faced with, the stronger we build because we have a common ground. So the power of doing group work also brings a community together. And
Mm.
that's why I set up my Facebook group, which is Dare to Dream Greater.
Okay.
It's a small group, but I don't want to be have thousands of people that I don't feel I really know. I believe you start with something small and get, if you haven't got to know the few that are there, why would I have 1,000 people in my group?
Mm.
I believe there's power in, even if I just have an influence, positive influence on 2 or 3 people, it's better than not hearing the voice of thousands and they're just there for the numbers. Yeah, so that's what I do. So you find, yeah, and power, iron sharpens iron. And one valuable tool I'll give you today, if you're a widow, is you need to find someone in your community who has walked the journey longer than you and let them mentor you, walk alongside of them. Why? Because they will be daily your living testimony that you can do it. You can do it. And that's one thing that empowered me as well. I was connected to a woman who had started to raise her children on her own. She'd walked the journey. It wasn't easy for her as well, but she'd passed the milestones that I was trying to reach. And when you visualize that, you have that person to phone in the evenings or whatever, or you're doing things, or you're not so sure about certain things with your children, it just helps you to have someone else to bounce ideas, and they make you more self-aware of things you're perhaps not facing or avoiding, or pitfalls you might fall into, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank you. You can dare to dream again. And as I said, Yemi has got a group on Facebook, Dare to Dream Greater. So yeah, we'll post it in the links on the page, and then you can share it around. That if you're a widow, you listen to what Yemi is saying, and you don't want to be stuck. She says one of the things that people go through is that they are stuck sometimes, and you don't want to be stuck, then you want to be in a community of other people who are navigating the same thing. You want to move forward with your life. Then you can join this community on Facebook. It's called Dare to Dream Greater. Dare to Dream Greater. So one of the things I've seen is that sometimes, and this is me. I'm not a widow, so I can't say I know. I've seen that sometimes a lot of women don't remarry, or don't seem to move forward, or they face poverty or that shame. And you mentioned it. Why is it shameful to be a widow? Why?
Well, what it is, what I've come to, well, maybe I didn't know, but I know more now, is the widow is perceived in different communities in different ways. But there's some countries of the world, in most countries of the world, a lot of widows face abject poverty. Why? Because the governments do not protect widows. There is a big organization in America called the Modern Widows Club, and this lady, Carolyn Moore, is doing a lot around the world to impact the support and finances in business and so on and so forth for widows. So there's that. Government, there's not a national, there was a recent law introduced, but we've got loads of miles to go. So there's lack of government protection, lack of governance in the needs and provisions and care for widows. Number two, there's a high, because there's no protection, there's a huge exploitation of widows. So that means if you have no government that makes you accountable, makes people accountable to the way they treat you or how they claim your property when your husband dies, what leg do you have to stand on? Number three, when you're vulnerable, what happens? The vultures come to catch you. So you find you're going to people you shouldn't go to ask for money and ask for support, and they trample on you further. Number four, in a lot of Western societies, there is support in different ways, but it will be perhaps by the welfare state, or you get tax, you get pension from the state. However, the incomes are quite low because we're aware that when a man dies, especially in the home, more than half of the income is lost in that home. So financially, women become low income earners. So you have to find, one of the biggies is, where do you get extra income to support your family? And there's issues around men, especially not leaving life cover for their wives in the West. They haven't done taking out insurances. It's so huge. So that is there, that's there as well. And then there's also self-awareness. From the moment you become a widow, you have to realize straight away you're single, you're vulnerable. Some men do not don't understand. They might do, but the first thing they see is you're single. So you have to avoid making yourself vulnerable and be careful who you're sharing your problems with, because they might be the ones that might take advantage of you. So you have to set in place so many things. Like I write on my blog and on my podcast, a lot of things I had to do. Like, for example, certain people can't come to my house at a certain time. I don't receive calls at a certain time as a single woman. No man can just pop around into my house. No way. All those things you have to revisit again. You know, even I've had cases where even your so-called spouses, late spouses, friends were trying to take advantage. Even friends, they think because you don't have a husband, you have nothing to do. They want to send you on all the errands around the world. So many issues. So it's very important to work with someone who's been there, because your grief makes you vulnerable. Your grief doesn't make you see for a while. So it's important to guard yourself with good people around you. And I tell you one secret, the people you think are going to stay are never the ones that stay to support you. So
Mm.
don't start looking at the ones that were there. Many times their father a feel. He might even be the neighbor you only said hi to in 10 years, might be the one that will come and support you.
That's you really know, you really hit the nail on the head, because I used to think, well, what I think widows are always, they seem to believe in a lot of poverty. They don't, so the woman in particular, they don't get married. They're there for like years, and some don't seem to move forward. And I used to ponder this in my mind, and now you know what, you're really breaking it down.
And can I,
That
sorry, can I just,
poverty.
yeah, and in relation to the topic we're doing, which is ash bias, one of the biggest things, especially in specific cultures around the world, is they have this thing, this stigma. There's a stigma around widows in
Yeah.
terms of culture and tradition. I was opportune to interview a widow, and she was telling me things in the 21st century, that when a woman becomes widowed, they keep her in a place, in a space for 6 months. They
What?
tell you to cut your hair. Even if you don't cut your hair, they don't even want you to. They take you to go and have certain rituals or baths. Then they take your clothes off and tell you to chuck them away. Even if you want to do your hair, they have to get another widow to do your hair. So many, so many horrible things. Or they even see you as bad luck. Like when you're walking around in the community, people avoid you because they even just catching your gaze, they think you might bring them bad luck. And so it goes on. So if there's all those cultural and traditional beliefs, how does a wiggles, even in the West, in certain cultures, because we find through in sociology that wherever cultures go and community go, they bring their cultures and traditions with them. We get that even in the Western world as well.
Yeah.
So it's about lifting your gaze. So when you are surrounded around people who are biased and stigmatize you, you're
Mm.
going to remain stuck, aren't you? There's
Yeah.
a saying that they said, if you count the four people around you that are very close, that determines how wealthy you are. So if you are surrounded by people who are biased and stigmatizing you, that's the value you give yourself, and that's the value you gain from them.
Wow. Thank you so for breaking that. Thank you so much for breaking that down. Some cultures just stigmatize widows, and it's, as you said, it's really relevant to the topic we're talking about the bias that comes from being a widow. I can't believe what you're saying. 21st century, they're still cheating in wood, like almost like she's nothing.
Of
Because
course. I mean, I interviewed a few widows where there was a lady, she was fortunate to have been, her husband had life insurance, but because she was quite young, she was under 30, the mother-in-law said she would keep the money. It was a good million, kept the money. And when it was time for the child to go to school, respectfully, she asked the woman, can we have school fees? The woman said there's no money. And that's
what?
when she realized she had to run away from there, that these people were not good people. And this was a family she married into, because when you look at generally, if the female species, sorry to use that word, When we marry the husband's family,
Yes.
meaning you take the name. In most cultures, we do. So you, over the years, even before you commit in marriage, you see your mother-in-law, your father-in-law as your own parents as well. So when such betrayals are committed against you, you lose faith in people because the people that are meant to be your parents have betrayed you. So who else won't betray you? So that means everything that protects you, you have to flee for your life and find somewhere else to live. That makes you vulnerable as well. You're
Ah,
still grieving, you're in pain, and then the people are meant to watch and keep you. They've betrayed you, they exploit you. I had a lady who told me the day she buried her husband, when she came home, all her in-laws were in the house. They were wearing his clothes and everything, taking all his goods out of the house the day she laid her husband to rest. And we wonder why. Ash bias, widows. So it's for widows ourselves to be aware of how vulnerable we are. And women who are married, you have to make sure you have insurances, because a wife today, God forbid, you can't be a widow tomorrow. So that's
mm,
why it's not just widows that need to just listen to this. We need to encourage our men that you're married with to have life insurance, term insurance, critical illness insurance, because, or at least insurances that cover your property when they if they die. And we all know death comes. It's either one or the other that's going to go. So both of you should have some form of cover,
thank
especially
you.
when you have children, especially when you have, from the moment you start to bring a new life in the world, you need to have insurance cover.
You hear that, ladies? From the moment you start to bring a new life into what you need to have insurance cover. It cannot be. It really. It's not something that you have to live on the pile because I mean, I'm telling you, God forbid, one ends up, as you said, one side is going to die before the other.
Of course.
And then you're going to end up being on your own with no money, and that is it. And that's one way you can actually overcome the bias or the barrier to be. If your husband goes first, then you have something to fall back on financially to hold you.
Yeah, because what happens as well with me is I've heard people say when it becomes a conversation among couples to say have insurance, some of the men will say, God forbid, why are you planning? You think I'm going to die? There's nothing about it's not about God forbid. Or are you thinking, are you planning for me to die? It's not that. It's part in our lives, we have to have a wider vision of where we want to go. So in the wider vision of your future, you're not looking to remain the same as A, where you were in A. And that's the same when we look at insurances and cover. It's about preempting all eventualities. What if Miss B goes or Mr. C goes? What's going to happen to me?
Mm,
Yeah? Even if you're making good money, the bottom line is half of your income goes when one spouse leaves, well, especially the male, because we still live in a predominantly male society where they
mm.
earn more than women. But we thank God for the internet now, where women are finding greater voices and greater opportunities, where they don't even have to leave their homes to make money.
That's fantastic. So, you know what? We're going to start rounding up. But I love what you say. Woman, you can start making money from home. The internet has changed the landscape. And that's one of the ways you can break it, isn't it? Break the barriers.
Definitely,
Is now
definitely.
you start looking for ways to make money while you're still married. So that if anything happens, God forbid, as we say in our African Yoruba culture, if anything
Yeah.
happens, you have something to fall back on. You're not relying on what your husband left alone, or you mean, as you said, we just get mistreated.
That's
Mistreated to
an
the point.
understatement.
Is it understatement?
Mistreatment is like they're nothing. I think they even get treated worse than dogs. If you look at studies in India, how they treat widows in some African countries, there was a lady, they even see you like they own you. So what keeps widows stuck as well is like when some of them stay with their in-laws, the ex-in-laws, because the Bible says, unto death till we part. Once you've parted, you're meant to start looking to another future. But because of economics, some of the widows stay with that family and they hold you like you're like a captive there. Some of them even become slaves,
Oh, that's a shame.
being used and everything and having no say. You don't even sometimes they even have say over your own children. Why? Because the person is providing for you economically. So whatever decisions they make, you have no yes or no. You just have to adhere to them.
Honestly,
People
I
happen
really
to.
love the work that you do. I really, and I'm going to be champion this work. I didn't know that this is. I mean, I know from what I saw that from
Yeah.
what I see around that widows do struggle, and there's a lot of barriers and there's a stigma and the shame. But I didn't know was to that extent that they are mistreated and even owned like slaves and mistreated to that extent in some cultures.
They are really badly, and some of them are raped and exploited sexually.
Oh,
Really,
what?
it's really, you only need to do research on stats around the world. In England, for example, the average widow as of early 21st century is like 73. But however, we still have a small group of widows in the UK that are quite young, under 30, that are becoming widows. And
But
that
why is
puts
that
another.
so? What do you think is making that to
There's a lot
happen?
of I mean, a lot of ill health. I've come across people with different sicknesses. There's a lot of sicknesses in communities, especially cancer, brain tumors, so many things, ailments that are very distressing, that have come into our communities, and people. That's why you find a lot of people are pursuing the route of healthy living, healthy eating, veganism, because some people would argue that there's a lot of things that are in our foods and so on and so forth. That's for another day.
Yeah, it
So
is.
it's
It
creating a
is.
lot of health problems.
But you've hit a point that I never thought about that even health relates to some of the things why people die early, and then
Of
somebody can
course.
actually end up becoming a widow very even under 30. So that's
Yeah.
actually a really important point there. But thank you so much for liking that. But so as we just want to, I just want to just say, what word of hope would you give somebody as they tie up tonight? No, I know you said lift up your gaze. I love that statement.
Mm,
Lift up your gaze, women. If you're a widow, lift up your gaze. Change your mind. Become
mm,
empowered to walk out of widowhood. It's a
mm.
mind work, as Emily says. So what word would you leave for
What,
as a
what
word
I,
of hope?
the word I would always leave is there's always hope after loss. I mean, if I can do it, I don't have two heads. I only have one head. I'm only human. It's about your mind, the power of the mind. Start to read more about how powerful your mind is and talk to yourself, self affirmation. I can do it. Many times we want to take bolder steps and build our spiritual qualities like courage. You have to say, I always say to myself, I teach my children, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Someone says you're a woman, or people look at you, you're a woman. I just say to myself, I can do all things through Christ. You say that to yourself every day, you notice a difference in your mindset.
Thank you so much. I can do all things.
Things through
I
Christ.
can do all
Do all
things.
things
I
through
love that.
Christ who
I can do
strengthens
all
me.
things. I know it's in the Bible, but it's
Yeah,
beyond that. It's the matter of saying I can.
of
And if you say you
course.
can, you will.
Yes,
You
definitely.
can walk
Because your
out.
mind, your cognition is very powerful. In cognitive behavioral therapy, this is what it's about. Even where we don't even include Christ, they teach you to turn negatives to positives. So please,
Oh.
dare to dream greater.
Okay, so the people can reach you again in your group on Facebook, Dare to Dream Greater, and on your website, isn't it?
It's business and marriage coaching.co.uk. Can I just say I coach on the 5 F's, not just on marriage, it's on family, faith, fitness, friendship, and I always forget the last one. Anyway, find me on my website.
Yeah,
So I
business
coach
and
on
marriage
everything that
coaching.
makes you business and marriage coaching.co.uk. And find me online. You find me online. I will give you links on my prayer book. I've got so many free notes I can give you to encourage you. The 5 steps you take. If you go to my website, you can get that for free. You register your name and you get it automatically on your email. The 5 basic steps to start finding your way out of widowhood. So be
Thank you so
empowered.
much.
Yeah, thank you, Wumi, for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I've seen Auntie Grace here. Thank you for being on the live, Auntie Grace. Not to see you. Good to see you. Thank you everybody for watching. Yes, thank you so much, Yemi. Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
having me. It's been quite enlightening and empowering. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that's it tonight. Good to see you all. And bye for now. Bye.
Bye.